It has never been my intention to set down all of Hercule Poirot's cases. Many, by their political sensitivity or private sorrow, must remain unspoken while those concerned are yet alive. Others are of such elegant simplicity that their telling would seem an intrusion upon art itself. But there are a few, only a few, that I have long hesitated to record for a different reason. They reveal my friend, not merely as the unerring logician the world imagines, but as a man moved, at times, by pity. One such affair took place during the London season of 1932, when the city still glittered through the last chill breath of empire. It began, as these things so often do, in a house whose order was almost too perfect, a diplomatic residence in Belgravia, where mirrors faced each other in faultless symmetry and not a curtain dared to fall awry. We had been invited to an evening reception by His Majesty's ambassador, Sir Lionel March. Within those gracious rooms, beneath the soft light of shaded lamps, among the scent of cigars and violets, courtesy veiled a tension that neither I nor any other guest could name. Before the night was done, a man would die behind a locked door, and the fragile geometry of that elegant household would crack to reveal the fear beneath. I have called this recollection Hercule Poirot and the Murder at the Ambassador's Residence. And if you enjoy this mystery, do subscribe and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Chapter 1. The Violet Reception. There are London houses that never quite fall asleep. They glow, they breathe, they listen. On a wet March evening in 1936, I found myself beneath the fanlight of such a house in Belgravia, the ambassador's residence, where the lamps were shaded in silk and the voices ran low as a string quartet. The rain had come in from the east, soft and persistent, the sort that darkens stone and makes the pavements gleam like polished jet. Our taxi pulled up to a door flanked by twin bay trees in white-painted tubs. Their leaves glossy with moisture, Poirot emerged first, adjusting his overcoat with the precision of a man arranging chess pieces. He carried a slim black umbrella he had not opened. He dislikes the asymmetry of dripping ribs, and wore a boutonniere of white carnation that needed no adjusting, but received one nonetheless. "The symmetry of the entrance hall," he murmured as we mounted the steps, "is, I am told, soothing to the nerves." I, for my part, noticed only the scent of violets drifting from the open door, the polish on the black and white parquet within, and the faint strains of Debussy played with feeling, if not absolute precision. A footman took our coats. The hall was as Poirot had promised, paired chairs upholstered in pale blue damask, twin Chinese vases on matching pedestals, a mirror centered above a console table with such exactitude that one felt the house itself had exhaled in relief. The carpet was Turkish, the chandelier modest, the staircase curved with that Edwardian confidence that suggests nothing untoward could ever occur within these walls. We were greeted by Sir Lionel March, His Majesty's ambassador to an unnamed but important European power. He was a tall, handsome figure in his early 50s, with iron-grey hair and the upright bearing of a man who had once commanded a regiment and now commanded nothing more dangerous than the memoranda and state dinners he moved, as some officers do, without seeming to creak, smoothly, deliberately, as though every gesture had been rehearsed for a photograph that might appear in the Times. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand. "Captain Hastings, you honor us. My wife has spoken of little else since your acceptance arrived." Lady March appeared at his elbow, pale and beautifully dressed in dove-grey silk with a high collar and long sleeves. She wore a double strand of pearls and a small corsage of Parma violets pinned at her shoulder. Her face had the porcelain stillness of certain society women, lovely, controlled, impossible to read. She greeted us with the practiced grace that makes one wish to stand straighter and speak less. "It is only a few friends," she said, her voice low and musical, "and one enemy, the weather." She smiled faintly. "I do hope you will forgive the informality. We have dispensed with full evening dress. March is so unpredictable." The rooms beyond were handsome, without ostentation. Sober portraits of bewigged ancestors who were almost certainly not Sir Lionel's, good Turkish rugs in faded reds and blues, a pianoforte that had seen better fingers, but still held its tune. The drawing-room opened onto a smaller salon, and beyond that, through half-drawn curtains, one glimpsed a conservatory where palms stood in terracotta pots. Like patient guests, I recognized the Foreign Office crowd at once. Men with neat ties and watchful eyes, women who knew the steps to every diplomatic dance. There was Colonel Arbuthnot, on loan to the embassy from the India office. Sandy moustache, military posture slightly compromised by a persistent cough, and those thin Turkish cigarettes that leave a light, delicate ash. He nodded to me with the brisk camaraderie of men who have never served together but recognize the cut of the same cloth. There was the first secretary, Quentin Vale, dapper, irreproachably groomed, perhaps 35, with dark hair oiled smooth and a red rose in his buttonhole. He had the cultivated voice of a man who has learned to speak beautifully in 3 languages and wishes you to know it. He bowed to Lady March with a smile that seemed rehearsed, and she inclined her head with the smallest tightening of her fingers on her champagne glass. And there was Miss Celia Grey, the ambassador's private secretary. She stood slightly apart near the anteroom, wearing a well-fitted navy frock and sensible shoes, her dark hair pinned in a neat chignon. Before her, on a small table, sat a portable typewriter, a Corona, if I am not mistaken, upon which, I was told, the evening's place cards had been typed. She had the steady, intelligent gaze of women who do not waste words, and the composure of those who have learned to be invisible when necessary. Poirot surveyed the room with the satisfaction of a man encountering an old friend. He likes a room that behaves. The entrance hall had done so admirably. He admired the paired chairs, the twin vases, the mirror centered just so. Then his gaze travelled to a console table where a small ormolu clock sat a fraction, only a fraction, to the left of centre. He frowned. "Une caresse to the eyes," he murmured. "But a detail. No, leave it. It is not for tonight." A bell was rung for supper. A light buffet set in the dining room, where candles burned in silver sticks and cold salmon glistened beneath a glaze. I drifted toward the table, conscious of my appetite and Poirot's disapproval of it. In passing, I noticed a shallow mahogany cabinet in the corridor, a key press with a glass door, the brass hooks arranged in 2 tidy rows, each labelled in neat black capitals: study, library, drawing room, boudoir, morning room, and so forth. The keys themselves hung on silk cords with small tassels, each bow tied with the precision one associates with naval signalling. Reeves, the butler, an elderly man of the old school, white-haired and deliberate, closed the glass door with the finality of a sermon, and moved on. I thought nothing of it then. One does not, in such houses, question the rituals of order. Conversation flowed with the champagne. Sir Lionel spoke of the Rhineland carefully. Colonel Arbuthnot coughed and spoke of Kashmir less carefully. Miss Grey contributed little, but listened much, her fingers occasionally brushing the keys of her typewriter, as though reassuring herself it was still there. Vale circulated with the ease of a man who knows precisely when to laugh and when to look solemn. Lady March moved among her guests like a swan on still water, graceful, silent, untouchable. And yet there was something. Not in the laughter, not in the crystal, in the way Lady March's fingers, light on her glass, tightened when Vale bowed. In the flick of Vale's eyes toward the anteroom where Miss Grey sat, in the scent of violets that lingered an instant too long, as though the flowers themselves were reluctant to leave. Unease is an absurd word for an evening of such polish, yet I felt it, faintly, like the distant approach of thunder one cannot yet hear. I thought it simply the weather and my own appetite. I was wrong. Chapter 2. Death Behind the Study Door. It was 11:30 when the thing occurred. Sir Lionel had excused himself to his private study on the first floor to place a telephone call to Downing Street. Something about a memorandum that could not wait until morning. The sort of phrase that means everything in diplomatic circles and nothing at all to the rest of us. He departed quietly, a sheaf of papers under one arm, and the conversation in the drawing-room resumed its gentle hum. Poirot and I had withdrawn to the smaller salon, where he was examining a particularly fine example of Sèvres porcelain with the intensity he usually reserves for fingerprints. I was attempting to follow the thread of Colonel Arbuthnot's views on the Bengal lancers when Reeves appeared in the doorway, moving with a speed that seemed for him indecorous. He approached Sir Lionel, who had returned to the drawing-room after ascending the stairs, and spoke in an undertone. Sir Lionel's face, already pale in the lamplight, went paler still. He rose without apology and followed Reeves into the corridor. Poirot's head turned, a fraction, like a cat that has heard a mouse behind the wainscoting. "Hastings," he said softly, "the evening has just become interesting." We followed at a discreet distance. In the first-floor corridor, outside the study door, a small group had assembled. Reeves, a second footman whose name I did not know, and Sir Lionel himself, turning a key over in his hands with an expression of profound bewilderment. "The door was locked," Reeves was saying, his voice low but urgent. "I knocked, Sir Lionel. I called out." Mr. Vale did not answer. I could see, through the gap beneath the door, the key lying on the carpet, just inside. "Vale?" Sir Lionel's voice was sharp. "But I left him downstairs. What was he doing in my study?" "I cannot say, sir. But when you did not answer, and the key was visible within, I thought it best to fetch you at once." Sir Lionel knelt, an undignified posture for an ambassador, but necessity makes fools of us all, and peered beneath the door. I could see it myself now, a large brass key glinting on the threshold. The gap was perhaps an inch and a half, no more. "The old trick," murmured Poirot beside me. "A visiting card, n'est-ce pas?" Reeves produced a card from his waistcoat, his own, as it happened, and slid it carefully beneath the door. With infinite patience, he manoeuvred it beneath the key and drew both slowly outward. The key emerged onto the card like a conjurer's trick. Sir Lionel took it, his hand steady, and fitted it into the lock. The door swung open. Quentin Vale lay on the rug, a little to the right of the desk, his body angled toward the window. His head was turned away from us, one arm flung out, as though he had been reaching for something. The red rose was still in his buttonhole, but it was crushed now, the petals bruised dark. A slender paper knife, one of those pretty gilt things with an enamel handle, was driven between his ribs, just below the left shoulder blade. There was surprisingly little blood. The blow had been precise. The desk itself was orderly, blotter squared, pens aligned, a small bronze inkwell closed. 2 little bronze griffins, facing inward, flanked the empty stand where the paper knife had rested. The window was latched from within, the heavy velvet curtains drawn. The hearth held a grey dusted grate, cold and untouched. There was nothing violent about the room. It had the terrible neatness of a chapel. Sir Lionel went white. "God forgive me," he said, his voice barely audible. "My study." Poirot moved forward with the deliberation of a surgeon approaching an operating table. He knelt beside the body, touched nothing, but his eyes travelled over every surface, the angle of the limbs, the position of the knife, the faint disarrangement of the blotter. He leaned closer, sniffed delicately, then rose. "This is not the telephone," he said softly. "This is murder." Sir Lionel seemed to gather himself with effort. "The police must be sent for at once, Reeves." "At once, Sir Lionel. And the guests?" "They are in the far salon, sir. I took the liberty of suggesting they remain there until—" he faltered. "Until the unpleasantness is resolved, quite right." Sir Lionel turned to Poirot. Poirot, I know this is irregular, but might I beg your counsel until the authorities arrive? The matter is delicate. My position. I comprehend, Sir Lionel. You may rely upon the discretion of Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings, naturally. I nodded, feeling that curious mixture of horror and fascination that accompanies such discoveries. A man had been murdered, a man I had spoken to less than an hour before, and yet I confess I felt, shamefully, a little thrill. Poirot moved about the room with the care of a man reading a manuscript in a foreign tongue. He examined the window latch. Running his finger along the sill, he studied the grate, the faint pattern of ash that remained there. He lifted the corner of the desk blotter and sniffed again. "Violets," he murmured. "Faint, but unmistakable." He turned his attention to the door. The lock was a sturdy brass affair, well oiled. The key that Reeves had retrieved lay on the desk now, its silk tassel slightly frayed. Poirot knelt once more and examined the threshold, tilting his head like a bird. "Voilà," he said, tracing a faint mark in the nap of the carpet. "A scrape, Hastings, from door to desk, as though something had been drawn beneath." "The visiting card," I said, "to retrieve the key." "Precisely. The key was pushed from the lock on the inside, drawn out on the card, and then—" he paused, his eyes narrowing. "And then the door was locked from the outside, with a second key, a duplicate." "But surely," I protested, "if the murderer locked the door from outside, how did the key come to be inside?" "That, mon ami, is the question that will illuminate all." He rose, dusting his knees with a fastidiousness that seemed absurd under the circumstances. "Come, we must speak to them each in turn." Chapter 3. Perfume, ink, and ash. The interviews were conducted in a small anteroom off the main corridor, under the shade of a lamp that made everyone's skin look like Ivory Poirot sat behind a writing table, his hands folded, his expression one of courteous attention. I took notes, though I doubted their usefulness. My shorthand is serviceable, but not inspired. Sir Lionel was first. He stood rather than sat, his posture military, his voice controlled. "I went to the study at 11:15, he said. "I intended to draft a note by hand. A memorandum for the Foreign Secretary. I wrote perhaps a dozen lines." He lifted his right hand. There was a faint smear of blue-black ink on his forefinger, near the nail. I was interrupted by a message from Colonel Arbuthnot regarding a misplaced dispatch. I left the study to speak with him in the drawing-room. That was perhaps 10 minutes later. I did not lock the door. I rarely do when I intend to return shortly. "And the key, Sir Lionel?" "I had taken it from the press earlier in the evening." "Yes, but I returned it, I'm quite certain, before going downstairs. Reeves will confirm it." Poirot made a note. "You saw no one in the corridor?" "No one. The guests were all in the salon or the drawing-room." "And Mr. Vale? You did not see him go upstairs?" "I did not. I assumed he was with the others." Lady March was next. She entered with the same composed grace she had shown all evening, though her pallor was more pronounced now. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her grey silk gown pooling around her like still water. The corsage of violets was still pinned at her shoulder, but one or two of the petals had come loose. "I did not go near the study," she said, her voice steady. "I detest rooms with green leather. They remind me of my father's chambers." She hesitated. "Mr. Vale and I spoke briefly in the conservatory around 11. He wished to discuss a matter of no consequence, a question of seating arrangements for next week's dinner. I told him Miss Grey would handle it. And after that, madame, I returned to the salon. I spoke with Mrs. Arbuthnot. I believe I remained there until Reeves came to fetch my husband." Poirot's gaze drifted to her hands. Her gloves, pale grey kid, lay on the table beside her. On the forefinger of the right glove was the palest mist of ink, precisely where a finger would rest when depressing the keys of a typewriter. "You type, Lady March?" "I do. I have a small portable machine in my boudoir for personal correspondence. One cannot always rely on secretaries for matters of a private nature." The scent of violets came and went, like a thought one tries not to think. Miss Celia Grey was calm as a mill-pond. She sat upright, her hands folded, her eyes meeting Poirot's without evasion. "I remained in the anteroom the entire evening," she said. "I was finishing a seating list for Monday's luncheon. I typed 3 place cards after supper, for late editions on my own machine." She gestured toward the small corona on the side table. "If you require a sample of my typing, Monsieur Poirot, I can oblige." Her tone was cool, professional, without a trace of defensiveness. Poirot inclined his head. "That will not be necessary, mademoiselle. You heard nothing unusual?" "Nothing. The drawing-room is well insulated. I heard the string quartet. Faintly, I heard footsteps on the stairs once or twice. Nothing more." "And Mr. Vale? You saw him this evening?" A flicker, the smallest hesitation. "I saw him briefly before dinner. He asked me to type a note for him, a personal matter. I declined. I am the ambassador's secretary, not his. He was angry. He was annoyed. Mr. Vale was a man accustomed to having his requests fulfilled." Colonel Arbuthnot was less composed. He coughed twice before speaking and lit one of his Turkish cigarettes with trembling hands. "Dashed awkward," he said. "Poor Vale. Smooth chap. Too smooth by half, if you ask me. But competent. Very competent." "You were in the corridor this evening, Colonel?" "Briefly, yes. Around 11:20, I should think. I stepped out for a smoke. My wife disapproves of tobacco indoors. I ashed in a saucer on the console table. Didn't go near the study, though didn't see Vale either. You smoked a Turkish cigarette? Always do. Can't abide Virginian. Leaves a dreadful taste. Poirot made another note. You knew Mr. Vale well? Well enough. Worked with him on the Kashmir dispatches last month. Sharp mind. A bit too fond of the ladies, perhaps. But who isn't at that age? The other guests had heard very little. A low exclamation from Reeves, the soft hurry of steps. The string quartet had faltered mid-phrase, then played on. No one had seen Vale go upstairs. No one had heard a cry. We returned to the study. The body had been covered with a sheet at Sir Lionel's request, but the room remained otherwise undisturbed. Poirot knelt once more beside the desk and lifted the blotter. Regard, Hastings. The blotter is faintly perfumed, as though a sachet or a corsage had been pressed there. He opened the waste-paper basket and withdrew a single corner of a typing paper, torn carelessly. A single line was visible. Come at once. L. March. The typeface was uneven. The letter EE sat a fraction high, the line slightly crooked. The underwood in Miss Grey's anteroom, said Poirot, is an embassy machine. It types with mechanical perfection. This, he held the scrap to the light. This was typed on a smaller machine, a portable. On the hearthrug lay a delicate cone of pale ash, nearly colourless. I bent to examine it. Turkish, I said confidently. The Colonel, surely. Poirot smiled without mirth. Touch it, mon ami. I did. It crumbled to powder at the lightest pressure. The ash of Turkish tobacco, said Poirot, is pale but cohesive. This is something else. A French cigarette, perhaps, or an Egyptian. Mr. Vale smoked a pipe, we are told, yet there is no pipe ash here. He turned his attention to Vale's body, the ink stain at the cuff of his right sleeve, the crushed boutonniere, and there, beneath his left shoulder, almost hidden by the border of the rug, a single violet, flattened as though pressed in a book. Too many clues, I said. That is the worst sort. Or, said Poirot gently, exactly the right number, if one knows how to arrange them. Chapter 4. The Asymmetry of the Griffins. It was after 1 o'clock when Poirot, having prowled the study like a cat, and then sat motionless as a carved idol, rose and gestured for me to follow. Hastings, he said, our hostess wears the violets. The room smells faintly of the violets. The blotter carries the shadow of the violets. And yet, there is a thing more delicate than perfume. It is arrangement. He led me to the key press in the corridor. The mahogany cabinet gleamed under the lamplight, its glass door reflecting our faces in wavering duplicates. Inside, the keys hung in 2 neat rows, each on its silk cord, each labelled in precise capitals. Observe, said Poirot. I looked. I saw keys. The bows, Hastings, the little tassels on the left side, all face inward to the centre. On the right side, the same. Symmetry, you comprehend? It is the habit of a careful mind, Reeves, perhaps, or the housekeeper. But regard the key marked Study. I peered closer. The study key hung on the left, but its bow faced outward, to the right, breaking the pattern. Someone replaced it in haste, said Poirot. Someone whose mind was occupied with other things. Someone who wished to return the key quickly before it was missed, and who did not notice, or did not care, that the bow faced the wrong direction. But if the murderer used the duplicate to lock the door from outside, I said, why return it at all? Why not simply pocket it? Because, mon ami, the absence of the key would be noticed. Reeves checks the press each evening before retiring. An empty hook would raise questions, but a key returned carelessly in the wrong orientation. That might escape attention. He moved back to the study and knelt once more by the threshold. The faint scrape in the carpet nap was still visible, running from the door toward the desk. "The visiting card trick," he murmured. "Bien sûr. The key is pushed from the lock on the inside, pushed by whom, we shall discover, and falls to the floor. A card is slid beneath the door to catch it, and it is drawn out into the corridor. Then the duplicate from the press is used to lock the door from outside. The duplicate is returned, hastily, incorrectly, and polished to remove any trace of fingerprints. Voila, a locked room. But who pushed the key from inside? That, said Poirot, is the question that reveals all. He rose and approached the desk. The two bronze griffins sat on either side of the empty paper-knife stand, facing inward, their wings folded, their beaks open in silent roars. Poirot touched the stand lightly, then stepped back, tilting his head. "They are not aligned," he said. I stared. They looked perfectly aligned to me. "The base of the stand shows a faint oval in the dust," said Poirot, tracing it with one finger. "The paper-knife rested here for many weeks, perhaps months. But the griffins, they are a fraction out of true, not facing each other squarely. A small asymmetry. Perhaps they were jostled during the struggle. There was no struggle. The blow was single, precise, delivered from behind while Vale stood facing the desk. And yet the griffins are out of true. Why?" He moved to the waste-paper basket and retrieved the typed scrap once more. "Come at once, L. March, typed on a portable machine. The E is high, the line uneven. Lady March has such a machine in her boudoir. I observed its case when we passed the open door. Miss Gray's coroner types cleanly, professionally. She would not make such errors. But why would Lady March summon Vale to the study? She did not summon him to the study, Hastings. She summoned him to meet L. March herself, but she did not specify where. Vale, assuming the note came from Sir Lionel, went to the study, and there he found not the ambassador, but Lady March. And she killed him? She killed him. The paper-knife was to hand, a moment of panic perhaps, or rage. The blow was struck, and Vale fell. Lady March, a woman of intelligence and nerve, realized at once the enormity of what she had done. She could not simply leave the body to be discovered with the door unlocked. Suspicion would fall on her immediately. And so she devised the locked room illusion. But the key on the inside, she placed it there herself after locking the door from outside. She used the duplicate key from the press, locked the door, then slid the key beneath the door so it would be found inside. The visiting card method, but in reverse. A clever touch. It suggests the door was locked from within, implying suicide or accident. But Vale could not have locked himself in and then stabbed himself in the back. Exactly so, which is why the illusion fails upon examination. But it bought Lady March time to return to the salon, to compose herself, to be seen among the guests when the body was discovered. And the griffins? Ah, the griffins, a woman who arranges violets with such precision, who lives for poise and polish, would not leave the griffins out of true unless her hand had just touched the paper-knife stand, and her eye refused to look where her hand had been guilt. Hastings is a great disturber of symmetry. I thought of Lady March's pale face, her steady voice, her folded hands. I thought of the ink on her glove. "The note," I said. She typed the summons herself. "On her portable machine in the boudoir. Yes, the high E betrays it. She typed the note, perhaps addressed an envelope, hence the ink on her glove, and delivered it to Vale. She told him, perhaps, that Sir Lionel wished to see him urgently and discreetly. Vale, vain and ambitious, went at once, and the violet beneath his shoulder. Intimacy, mon ami. She stood very close, close enough for a petal to fall from her corsage onto his shoulder, onto the floor, when she struck close enough to smell her perfume. The perfume that has settled into the blotter, the perfume that lingers still. I felt a great sadness then. What was her motive? That, said Poirot, we shall discover in the next hour. Chapter 5. The gathering. We assembled in the smaller salon, Sir Lionel standing by the mantel, like a figure carved from duty, Lady March seated with her hands folded, her face composed to the point of stillness. Miss Grey sat near the window, watching Poirot with the attention one gives to a surgeon about to make the first incision. Colonel Arbuthnot coughed and stared at his shoes. Reeves stood by the door, a guardian of propriety even now. The police had been delayed, an accident on the Brompton Road, and Sir Lionel had asked Poirot to proceed. There was, he said, no point in prolonging the uncertainty. He wished to know the truth. Poirot stood in the centre of the room, his hands behind his back, his expression grave. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, "a man is dead, Mr. Quentin Vale, First Secretary to His Majesty's Ambassador. He was found in the private study, stabbed with a paper knife, the door locked from within. Or so it seemed." He paused, letting the words settle. "The locked door is, you comprehend, a classic illusion. A key is pushed from the lock inside, falls to the floor, and is drawn out beneath the door on a card. The door is then locked from outside with a duplicate key. The duplicate is returned to the key press, carelessly, with the bow facing the wrong direction. The key that was pushed from inside is left on the carpet within, suggesting the door was locked from the interior." Sir Lionel's face was pale. "But who? Patience, if you please." Poirot lifted a hand. Mr. Vale received a summons, a typed note reading, "Come at once, L. March." He believed it came from you, Sir Lionel. He went to the study. But you were not there. Instead, he found a lady, wearing violets. Lady March's lashes did not flicker. "He was not afraid," Poirot continued softly. He smiled. Perhaps he even made a jest. But the lady was not smiling. She had come to plead, perhaps, or to demand. Mr. Vale had in his possession certain letters written some years ago, before her marriage, letters of a nature that would cause scandal in diplomatic circles. He threatened to release them, unless— He paused. "Unless what, madame? Money? Advancement? Or simply the cruel pleasure of watching you suffer?" Lady March's voice, when it came, was barely audible. "He wanted both. Money and my silence. He said if I did not comply, he would send copies to the Foreign Secretary. He would destroy my husband's career." Sir Lionel moved as though struck. "Margaret!" "Let her speak," said Poirot gently. "The truth, madame. All of it." Lady March looked at her hands as though they belonged to someone else. "The letters were foolish. I was young. I was not myself. He kept them. I did not know. And then, 3 weeks ago, he showed them to me. He said he needed £10,000. He said if I did not pay, he would ensure Lionel was recalled in disgrace. Her voice steadied. I agreed to bring the money tonight. I told him to come to the study after the guests had gone. But I couldn't. I could not bear the thought of him in my house another moment. I typed a note on my machine. The portable in my boudoir, I gave it to him during supper in the conservatory. I told him Lionel wished to speak with him urgently, in private. And when he came, I was waiting. I had taken the key from the press earlier. Reeves was busy serving the champagne. He did not see I meant only to frighten Vale. To show him I would not be cowed. But he laughed. He said I was a fool. He said he had made copies of the letters, and I would pay regardless. She stopped. The room was utterly silent. I saw the paper knife on the stand. It was in my hand before I knew. I struck once. Only once. He fell. I did not mean... Her voice broke. I did not mean to kill him. Poirot's expression was one of profound sadness. And then, madame, you composed yourself. You realized the door must be locked to buy yourself time. You used the duplicate key from the press to lock the door from outside. You pushed the original key beneath the door so it would appear the room was locked from within. You returned the duplicate to the press, hastily, incorrectly, and polished it to remove your fingerprints. You returned to the salon as though nothing had occurred. But the griffins, I said, unable to contain myself. Why were they out of true? Poirot turned to me. Because, Hastings, when Lady March took the paper knife from its stand, her hand brushed the griffins. She jostled them a fraction out of alignment, but she did not, could not, look at them afterward. Her eye refused to see what her hand had done, and so the griffins remained out of true. A woman who arranges her life with such precision would not permit such a small asymmetry, unless guilt prevented her from noticing it. Lady March was weeping now, silently, her hands pressed to her face. Sir Lionel stood frozen, his expression one of anguish and incomprehension. "The letters, madame," said Poirot. "Where are they now?" "In his rooms," she whispered, "in a locked box beneath his bed. He told me so himself. He said they were safe." Poirot nodded. "The police will retrieve them. They will see the dates. They will understand." He turned to Sir Lionel. "I am not the law, monsieur. I am only a man who arranges facts. The police will come. They will weigh the motive, the circumstance, the provocation. They will consider that Mr. Vale was a blackmailer and that your wife acted in desperation. They will, I think, be merciful." Sir Lionel's voice was hoarse. "And my career?" "That," said Poirot, "is not for me to say." The case concluded not in noise, but in lowered voices and a closed door. The police arrived shortly after 2 o'clock. Lady March was escorted from the house with dignity, her face pale but composed. Sir Lionel followed, refusing to leave her side. The letters were found precisely where she had said, and their contents, though never made public, confirmed the blackmail. In due course there was an inquest. The jury returned a verdict of manslaughter under extreme provocation. Lady March was sentenced to 3 years, reduced to 18 months on appeal. She served her time quietly at Holloway and withdrew afterward to a cottage in Dorset. Sir Lionel resigned his post, but was not disgraced. The Foreign Office understands the value of discretion. He joined her in the country. They were seen, occasionally, walking together along the cliffs. The house in Belgravia was let to a Belgian industrialist. The string quartet was dismissed. Reeves retired to his sister's home in Bath. Miss Grey secured a position at the Home Office, where her precision and loyalty were much valued. Colonel Arbuthnot returned to India and was never heard from again, except in the pages of the Times, which noted his death from fever 2 years later. Vale's effects were sold, his rooms were cleared, the letters were sealed by court order and presumably destroyed, though such things have a way of surviving in locked drawers and forgotten files. On our way out that night, or rather that morning, for it was nearly 3 when we finally departed, Poirot paused by the key-press in the corridor. All the keys hung in their proper places now, the bows aligned, the silk cords untangled. The study key, I noticed, had been straightened, its bow faced inward, matching the others. Poirot touched it lightly, then closed the glass door with a fingertip. "It is well, mon ami," he said quietly. "Order is the mercy we offer to sorrow." We walked out into the wet March night. The rain had stopped, but the pavements still gleamed, and the air smelled of stone and early spring. A taxi appeared as though summoned by Providence, and we climbed in without speaking. I have thought often of that night, the scent of violets, the neatness of a room, the tiny shift in a pair of bronze griffins. We admire grand clues, the smoking gun, and the bloodied knife. But it is the half-inch that undoes us, the bow facing the wrong way, the letter E that sits too high, the desk ornament a fraction out of true. Poirot sat beside me in the taxi, his small hands folded, his eyes half closed. I thought he was asleep until he spoke. "You are thinking, Hastings, that it is a sad business." "I am." "You are correct. It is always sad when human beings behave as human beings do, with passion, with weakness, with terrible clarity in the moment, and terrible regret thereafter." "She did not mean to kill him." "Perhaps not. But she meant to bring the knife. She meant to meet him alone. She knew at some level what might occur." "That is not innocence, mon ami. It is something more complicated." "And Vale? A blackmailer is a species of murderer. He kills slowly, over years, with the weapon of fear. Lady March struck once, and quickly. I do not say it was right. I say only that I comprehend it." The taxi turned onto Knightsbridge. The city was silent, the windows dark. Somewhere a church bell struck 3. "The symmetry of the griffins," I said after a moment. "That is what betrayed her. That, and the violets, and the ink, and the key-press, and a dozen other things. But yes, the griffins were the final note. A woman who lives for order cannot easily disorder her own work, even when disorder would serve her. The murderer's hand and the decorator's hand are not the same hand. They cannot look at the same objects. One arranges, the other destroys. Lady March tried to be both. She failed. And yet you were kind to her." Poirot glanced at me, his green eyes luminous in the passing streetlight. "I'm always kind, Hastings, when kindness does not obscure the truth. She will pay for what she has done, but she need not pay more than justice demands." We rode in silence for a time. The taxi's engine hummed. A cat crossed the road, white and spectral. I thought of Sir Lionel standing by the mantel, of Lady March's folded hands, of the string quartet faltering mid-phrase. "Poirot," I said, "do you believe she loved her husband?" "I believe she loved his position. I believe she loved the life they had built together. Whether that is the same as love, mon ami." He shrugged, a gesture that encompassed worlds. That is a question for poets, not for detectives. And the letters? Destroyed, one hopes, though destruction is never quite complete. Letters have a way of surviving, like ghosts. They haunt us long after the paper has turned to ash. The taxi pulled up before Poirot's flat in Whitehaven Mansions. The doorman was absent. It was too late or too early for such courtesies. We climbed out into the damp air. Poirot paid the driver with his usual scrupulous precision, calculating the tip to the halfpenny. "Will you come up, Hastings? Some tisane, perhaps? It settles the nerves." "I think not. I should get home. Cynthia will worry." "Ah, yes, the good Cynthia. Give her my compliments." He paused at the door, key in hand. "You have learned something tonight, I think." "Have I?" "You have learned that the smallest asymmetry may conceal the largest crime. You have learned that order, when disrupted, tells a story. And you have learned, though you will forget it again by tomorrow, that the obvious suspect is rarely the correct one. Colonel Arbuthnot and his Turkish cigarettes." He smiled, a brief flash of white in the darkness. "You are, if I may say so, gloriously predictable." "Thank you," I said dryly. "It is not an insult. Predictability is a form of honesty. You see what you see. You think what you think. That is valuable in a friend, if not in a detective." He opened the door, then turned back. "One more thing, Hastings. When you write this up, for you will write it up, I know you, do not make me too solemn. I am a man who likes his comforts. The good meal, the neat room, the symmetrical vase. I am not a philosopher. I am only a man who notices when the bow faces the wrong way. I shall do my best. That is all any of us can do. Bonne nuit, my friend." "Good night, Poirot." He disappeared into the building, and I heard his footsteps on the stairs, light and precise as always. I walked toward the main road to hail another cab, my hands in my pockets, my mind full of violets and griffins and keys that hung the wrong way. The case of the ambassador's residence was not, in the end, one of Poirot's most famous. It didn't involve international intrigue, or missing jewels, or heirs to vast fortunes. It was only a woman, a blackmailer, and a moment of desperate violence. But it taught me something I have never quite forgotten, that the most elaborate locked rooms are not made of doors and windows, but of fear and pride, and the terrible lengths we go to preserve the illusion of order. And that a man who notices when the griffins are out of true may notice everything. The rain began again as I reached Piccadilly. Soft, persistent, the sort that darkens stone and makes one think of endings. I climbed into a taxi and gave the driver my address. The city slid past the windows, wet streets, empty squares, the pale glow of gas lamps reflected in the puddles. I thought of Lady March in her grey silk, her corsage of violets. I thought of Vale smiling, unafraid, in the moments before the knife. I thought of Poirot's voice, gentle and relentless, peeling away the layers of deception like pages from a book. And I thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, that there are houses in London that never quite fall asleep. They glow, they breathe, they listen, and sometimes, in the small hours of a March morning, they tell their secrets to a man with waxed moustaches and an eye for symmetry. The taxi turned onto my street. The windows of my flat were dark. Cynthia would be asleep. The house quiet. I would creep in, remove my shoes, pour a small whiskey, and sit by the dying fire until the greyness of dawn crept through the curtains. And tomorrow, Or today, rather, I would take out my notebook and begin to write. Hercule Poirot and the murder at the ambassador's residence, a locked room, a woman in grey, and a pair of bronze griffins that faced, very slightly, the wrong way. It is, I think, enough. The matter made very little scandal. The letters were retrieved. There was, in due course, an inquest. Sir Lionel stayed at his post. Lady March withdrew to the country. The house in Belgravia resumed its glow. Reeves polished the floors until they shone like still water. On our way out, Poirot paused by the key-press. He straightened one label that had slipped a fraction and closed the glass with a fingertip. "It is well, mon ami," he said. "Order is the mercy we offer to sorrow." I have thought often of that night, the scent of violets, the neatness of a room, the tiny shift in a pair of bronze griffins. We admire grand clues, but it is the half-inch that undoes us. If this delighted you, subscribe for more untold cases of Hercule Poirot and share where you're listening from.